"Get that filthy mutt away from my porch." The voice cracked like a whip through the still evening air, startling the neighbors and sending a scattering of crows from the telephone wires. The man who shouted Elias Carter, a widowed mechanic with a weathered face, was not prone to raising his voice, but the sight before him had struck a chord that twisted somewhere deep in his chest. A stray dog stood frozen at the bottom of his steps, its ribs sharp beneath a patchy coat of brown and gray. The animal didn't flinch at the insult. Instead, its jaws held a glint of metal, a small rusted locket dangling from a broken chain. The dog's eyes, startlingly human in their pleading depth, never wavered from Elias. For a long breath, neither man nor animal moved. The wind stirred dust across the gravel, carrying the faint scent of rain. Elias's fists tightened at his sides. He had buried memories years old that he never intended to see resurface. Yet here was this dog, dragging them back in the form of a forgotten trinket. "Where did you get that?" he muttered, his voice dropping into something more fragile, more dangerous. The stray padded forward, each step deliberate, leaving faint prints in the dirt. Its legs trembled as though exhaustion might collapse it at any moment. The chain clicked softly against its teeth with every breath. Elias felt his pulse hammer. He knew that Locket. He had seen it last resting around the neck of Clara, his younger sister, the one who had vanished 2 decades ago without a trace. He stepped down from the porch, boots crunching gravel, and the dog stopped just shy of arm's reach. For an instant, Elias imagined the years folding back, the laughter of his sister echoing from a summer long gone. Then the sharp edge of reality cut through. The woman was gone, her case unsolved, the pain sealed tight. And yet, impossibly, the locket had returned Clara. The name slipped out, unbidden, heavy with disbelief. The dog lowered its head, as if offering the trinket. Its breathing came ragged, each exhale carrying a faint whine. Elias crouched, hesitating before reaching out, his grease-stained fingers trembling. The metal was cool, rough with corrosion, but the engraving, a delicate curve of initials, was unmistakable. CMC. He felt the world tilt. Across the street, its curtains shifted. Neighbors peeked but said nothing, sensing the weight of something that didn't belong to them. A storm rolled far on the horizon, its thunder faint but warning of a night that wouldn't pass quietly. The stray's legs buckled, and it collapsed onto the gravel with a soft thud. Elias startled, dropping the locket to catch the dog's frail body. He pressed his ear close, hearing the shallow rise and fall of breath. The animal was weak but alive, against every instinct he had built after years of isolation. Elias lifted the dog into his arms. Its body was lighter than it should have been, a bundle of bones wrapped in fur. The locket swung against his wrist, a reminder that none of this could be dismissed as chance. Inside the house, the dim glow of a single lamp cast long shadows on peeling wallpaper. Elias laid the dog on an old quilt near the hearth. His chest felt tight, his thoughts a whirlwind. He washed the locket in a basin, watching flakes of rust spiral away, revealing more of the engraving. Beneath the initials, there was something else barely visible. A faint etching that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had been too worn to notice in the past. A date out. The numbers chilled him. The exact day Clara had vanished. The fire popped in the silence, making him flinch. He stared at the dog, its eyes half closed, as though it had carried the burden of this secret across miles only to lay it at his feet. Elias sank into his chair, the locket clutched in his fist. Every beat of his heart was a question he had no answer for. Why had the dog brought this? Where had it come from? And most unbearable of all, what did it mean that something belonging to Clara had resurfaced after so many lost years? Outside, thunder rolled again, closer now. The storm was moving in, but Elias knew the true storm had already arrived. By a stray dog with haunted eyes and a rusty locket that refused to let the past stay buried. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain pounded against the roof in violent sheets, rattling the loose shutters of Elias Carter's house. He sat awake in the armchair, the rusty locket still clenched in his hand, unable to let it go. The stray dog stirred weakly on the quilt by the hearth, its breathing shallow but steady. Every crack of thunder made it twitch, though it never once took its eyes off him. Those eyes unsettled him. They weren't just desperate, they were watchful, as if the animal was waiting for his next move. Elias tried to tell himself this was madness. Clara had been gone 20 years. Police had called it a runaway, though he never believed it. Her case had faded, buried under the passing of seasons, and all he had left was a few photographs in a box under his bed. Now, this locket, hers, unmistakably hers, had found its way back in the mouth of a half-dead dog. It felt less like coincidence and more like a message. When dawn came, gray and heavy with mist, Elias finally rose and moved toward the small table by the window. He pried the locket open, expecting nothing more than rust and decay. But inside, tucked beneath the cracked glass, was a fragment of paper, yellowed with age and damp from the storm. His breath caught. He teased it out carefully with a pair of tweezers, unfolding it inch by fragile inch. The writing was faint, blurred by time, but he could still read it. "Find me, Elm Creek, the old mill." The words clawed at his chest. Elm Creek lay 15 miles north, where an abandoned mill had rotted away in silence since before Clara vanished. His heart slammed in his ribs, threatening to undo him. It could be nothing, some cruel trick of coincidence. A scrap placed there by anyone, but the timing, the way it surfaced now, gnawed at him with undeniable force. The dog stirred again, letting out a faint whimper. Elias crouched beside it, brushing a hand lightly along its neck. He felt the bones sharp beneath the skin. Whoever this animal belonged to had failed it in every way, yet it had found him, carrying with it the one thing he thought was lost forever. Why bring this to me? His voice cracked in the quiet room, spoken to the animal but meant for someone far beyond it. As the day wore on, Elias fed the dog scraps of boiled chicken and let it drink water from a chipped bowl. It ate with trembling urgency, then collapsed again into exhausted sleep. He studied the rise and fall of its ribs, wondering if the creature was strong enough to survive the night. By evening, the rain had cleared, leaving the air thick and damp. Elias knew he couldn't stay in that house with questions clawing at his mind. He slid the locket into his pocket, glanced once at the dog, and stood. "I won't be gone long," he whispered, though part of him wasn't sure if he was lying. The drive north was slow. His old truck rattled along cracked asphalt, headlights slicing through pockets of fog. Every mile seemed to peel back a layer of memory, the summers spent swimming with Clara in the creek, the laughter echoing through the mill's empty chambers, the last night she had walked out the door and never returned. His hands gripped the wheel tighter with each turn. Elm Creek appeared at last, the mill's skeletal frame looming against the evening sky. Broken windows gaped like hollow eyes, and vines crept along weathered stone. Elias cut the engine, letting the silence consume him. Only the chirr of crickets and the whisper of water filled the air. He pushed the heavy door open, its rusted hinges groaning in protest. Dust swirled in the dim light, catching in his throat. Every step inside echoed, stirring ghosts from the shadows. He reached the center of the room and stopped. Something was there, half hidden beneath a collapsed beam, an old canvas satchel, mottled with rot but unmistakably placed. Kneeling, Elias pulled it free. His fingers shook as he fumbled with the straps. Inside were remnants: a faded sweater he remembered Clara wearing, a small notebook warped with water, and a photograph of the two of them as children. His chest constricted, the weight of years pressing hard. But what struck him most was not what he found, it was the realization that someone had been here before him. The bag was not untouched. The straps had been moved recently, the dirt disturbed around its resting place. Someone else knew. A noise from outside made him stiffen. Footsteps, deliberate and close. He snapped the locket shut and shoved the satchel beneath his coat. Heart hammering, he backed into the shadows, eyes fixed on the doorway. A figure entered, silhouetted against the fading light. Too tall, too slow-moving to be a teenager exploring the ruins. The man paused, surveying the mill with the practiced calm of someone who had been here before. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Whoever this was, he wasn't a stranger to Clara's story. And for the first time in 20 years, Elias realized he might not be the only one still haunted by her disappearance. The storm broke before dawn. Rain battered the tin roof of Elias's house, filling the air with a restless percussion. He had not slept. The locket lay on the table, polished just enough to reveal its engraving clearly under the weak lamplight, CMC Clara May Carter, and the date, etched faintly beneath, the night she had disappeared. Elias sat with his head in his hands, staring at the dog curled near the hearth. The animal slept fitfully, twitching with small painful spasms. When lightning split the sky, Elias rose and pulled a blanket over the dog's trembling body. "Why you?" he whispered. The question wasn't meant for an answer, but the dog stirred at the sound of his voice, its eyes opening to slivers of amber. For a strange moment, it felt like the animal understood something Elias didn't. Locket, the timing, the weight of memory. It was as if the past had clawed its way back in through a living messenger. As morning bled into gray daylight, Elias reached for the locket again, pressing the small clasp with his thumb. It resisted, stiff from rust, but finally snapped open. His breath caught. Inside was not the faded portrait he expected, but a folded scrap of paper pressed so tightly it had left an imprint on the metal. Carefully, with the precision of a mechanic prying at a stubborn bolt, Elias drew it out. The paper had yellowed, edges frayed by time, yet the ink was sharp enough to read. It was no letter, but a fragment, half a map, lines marking woods that ported to the Carter family's old farmland. His pulse hammered. He recognized the clearing, a place the children had played before Clara vanished. He had not set foot there since. Eli shoved the locket shut, his mind clawing at reasons. Who had placed this inside? And why would it return to him now, carried in the jaws of a starving stray? A sudden bark jolted him. The dog, though weak, had risen to its feet, gaze fixed on the door, its ears twitched, muscles tense. Elias froze, straining to listen. At first, there was only the drumming rain, but then he heard it, the crunch of footsteps on wet gravel. He moved to the window and pushed the curtain aside. A figure stood across the road, half shrouded by the downpour. The man wore a long coat, hat pulled low, his posture still as if waiting. Elias's stomach tightened. Nobody came out this far unless they had a reason. By the time Elias turned back, the dog had limped to the door, growling low in its throat. He placed a hand on its back, feeling the tremor of tension beneath the fur. "Easy," he murmured, though his own nerves rattled like loose bolts. When he looked again, the figure was gone. Only the shifting rain moved across the road. Hours later, when the storm eased, Elias gathered the locket and slipped it into his pocket. The unanswered questions pressed too heavily to ignore. He fetched his old coat and whistled softly. The dog, though weary, followed with surprising resolve, as though drawn by the same pull that had Elias gripping the map fragment. The field stretched wide and wet, the soil clinging to Elias's boots as he crossed toward the woods. The dog trudged beside him, each step stubborn despite fatigue. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, the sky still low with clouds. Elias's heart thudded harder with every yard, dread and hope fighting in equal measure. When they reached the clearing, it was both familiar and strange, overgrown with tall grass and tangled roots. Memories pressed down, laughter, shouts. The day Clara disappeared. Elias's hands shook as he pulled the map fragment from the locket and matched the lines to the trees around him. The dog barked sharply, running ahead toward a gnarled oak at the edge of the clearing. Its paws scraped at the base, claws tearing through damp soil. Elias rushed to it, his breath harsh in his chest. He knelt, hands digging alongside the dog's. The earth gave way too easily, as if disturbed not long ago. Within minutes, Elias's fingers struck wood. His breath hitched. It wasn't roots, it was a box. Small, weathered, and bound with rusted hinges. Mud streaked his arms as he lifted it free. The dog whined, pacing as if urging him on. Elias set the box on the ground, rain dripping from the branches overhead. His thumb hesitated on the latch. Something inside him resisted, as though opening it might unravel more than he was ready to face. But the dog sat before him, eyes locked on his, unblinking, steady. It felt less like an animal's gaze than a command. With a sharp exhale, Elias forced the box open. Inside, wrapped in rotting fabric, lay a collection of objects: a child's ribbon, faded pink, a silver ring with initials he recognized as his mother's, and another scrap of paper, sealed in a wax envelope. His vision blurred. These were relics of his family, pieces he thought lost to time. Yet someone had buried them here deliberately, hidden them in the earth all these years. He reached for the envelope, the wax brittle beneath his thumb. The dog gave a low bark again, ears flicking toward the tree line. Elias froze. This time, the sound was not rain or wind. Branches snapped, deliberate and close. They were not alone in the clearing. The storm had not eased. It pressed against the house like a living thing, rattling windows and groaning through the beams. Elias sat rigid in his chair, the locket clenched so tightly in his fist that its edges bit into his skin. On the quilt near the hearth, the stray stirred, its ribs rising and falling with shallow effort. For a long moment, the room seemed locked in a tense stillness, as if waiting for something to break. Then came the sound, a low whine, not from the dog, but from outside. Elias froze. It was a sound both mournful and insistent, a call that sliced through the storm's howl. The stray's ears twitched, and despite its weakness, it tried to lift its head. Its gaze darted toward the front door, urgency flickering in those exhausted eyes. Elias's pulse quickened. He rose slowly, set the locket on the table, and crossed to the door. When he opened it, the rain lashed his face, and the wind dragged at his shirt. At the edge of the yard, barely visible in the downpour, another figure moved. A second dog, larger, heavier set, paced restlessly, its coat soaked and its eyes catching the lamplight in flashes. It let out another sharp cry, then darted toward the trees, only to circle back as if demanding he follow. The stray inside gave a pitiful bark, struggling to rise but collapsing again with a thud. Elias turned from one to the other, a terrible certainty coiling in his chest. This was no coincidence. These animals weren't random wanderers. They were leading him somewhere. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, his hands trembling as he clipped the chain back onto the locket and slipped it into his pocket. The metal was cold against his chest, its weight pulling on memories he had tried to bury. With one last glance at the weak animal on the quilt, he pushed out into the storm. The second dog wasted no time. It bolted into the darkness, stopping just far enough ahead to ensure Elias followed. His boots sank into the mud, rain stung his eyes, and branches clawed at his arms, but he pressed forward, driven by something rawer than fear. The dog led him along the forgotten path that wound toward the riverbank, a place he had not walked in years. Not since Clara's disappearance. The night swallowed the world in shadow. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the swollen current, churning below the bluff. Elias's breath came hard, each step dragging him deeper into the mire of memory. He remembered the search parties, the broken calls through the trees, the sinking realization as days turned to silence. And now, decades later, he was back at the river's edge, guided by the unlikeliest of messengers. The larger dog stopped abruptly. It barked once, then pawed frantically at the ground near a twisted oak whose roots clung stubbornly to the eroded soil. Elias lifted his flashlight. At first he saw nothing but mud and tangled roots. But then the beam caught something unnatural. A shard of wood, splintered and weathered, half buried where the dog dug at his knees, gave way as he fell beside it, scraping at the earth with bare hands until nails cracked and mud caked his palms. More wood appeared, shaped into the remnants of a small box, waterlogged and fragile. His heart pounded in his throat. He pulled it free, dirt crumbling from its edges. The box groaned as it split open in his grip, and inside lay the impossible letters, faded, water-stained, but legible enough to bear Clara's handwriting. The storm muted around him, the roar of rain replaced by the blood rushing in his ears. He pulled one slip of paper free, his fingers shaking so violently the ink blurred before his eyes. Ilias, the first line read, and beneath, words that shattered every wall he had built. If you find this, then I couldn't escape. He collapsed against the tree, the letter pressed to his chest. Lightning ripped across the sky again, and in its flash he saw the second dog watching him with solemn stillness, as though it had fulfilled its task. Elias's mind reeled. Clara hadn't simply vanished. She had left behind a hidden trail, preserved all these years by the earth itself and uncovered only because of these animals. Behind him, a faint bark echoed through the storm. Elias turned sharply. The stray he had left at the house now staggered down the path, soaked and trembling but determined, dragging itself toward him as if to complete the circle. It collapsed at his feet, pressing its nose against the box, the chain of the locket brushing the damp wood. Elias stared at the dogs, at the letters, at the river that had swallowed so many answers. A terrible clarity descended. This was no accident. Something bound these creatures to Clara's story, and whatever truth lay buried here had waited too long to remain hidden. As thunder cracked overhead, Ilias rose with the letters in one hand, and the lockets in the other, the two dogs bracketing him in the stormlight. His grief was no longer passive. It had become a call to action. He would uncover what had been done to his sister, and whoever had silenced her past would face the reckoning he had been denied for decades. The storm faded by dawn, leaving the ground drenched and the air heavy with silence. Elias stood at the riverbank, the box of letters at his side, the locket cool in his hand. The two dogs lingered close, one leaning against his leg for warmth, the other watching the horizon as if keeping vigil. For the first time in decades, he no longer felt alone in carrying Clara's absence. Her words, fragile but undeniable, had reached him at last. He read through each letter as the light grew. They told of fear, of a shadow that had followed her, of her desperate attempt to leave clues hidden in places no one would search. Each page carried her voice across time, breaking the silence that had strangled him for years. The weight of her suffering pressed heavy, but beneath it, he felt a strange release. Clara had not vanished into nothing. Her story had survived, carried forward by unexpected messengers. The stray lifted its head, eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity that seemed more than instinct. Elias knelt, resting his hand on its scarred neck, and for a fleeting moment it was as though Clara herself had guided it here. He whispered her name, not in grief, but in gratitude. The dogs had done what no search party or police report ever could. They had delivered truth, and with it, the chance for peace. When he arose, Elias carried the letters against his chest, the locket hanging steady over his heart. He no longer walked as a man burdened by unanswered questions, but as one entrusted with a memory that could finally be honored. Behind him, the dogs followed, their paws pressing into the wet earth, leaving a trail back toward the light. The river still moved dark and restless, but Elias did not look back. He had found what mattered. And though the past could never be undone, Clara's voice had returned through rain, through silence, through the loyalty of strays who refused to let her be forgotten.